Welcome to a true spiritual adventure story like the world has never known. Volume 2, Rise of the First World Teacher, with your host, Dr. James Yogadhi Weldon. This is Dr. James Weldon Yogadhi, speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain, a community which is dedicated towards supporting higher states of consciousness and helping individuals grow into those higher states of consciousness. In so many ways, my life has come full circle. To complete this work, to be able to share with you quietly, without fanfare, about the amazing life that we individually and collectively live, makes me so happy. You know, life is such a huge mystery, and we need to know more about it. The story that I told in these last two works, that a few people read about and heard about, really a few. It was originally compiled before I went to my first advanced program for the Art of Living. And I went into that first advanced program after I had taken the Art of Living Happiness course. I was holding 350 pages of my story. As I gave the founder of the Art of Living the copy of that, in our first meeting, that was in the early 90s, since 1976, he took that work and smiled at me and knew that I was looking for answers. And there in that first meeting after our connection, where honestly he showed me an aspect of his life, his existence, on an unbelievably high level of life. I wondered if it was possible that I could ever experience that again. And right there at that meeting, so many years later, with other people in the room, he took me back there to show me that there is a level of life where we are forever. You know, this body doesn't live so long. Do you know we have another body? We have a next level of our existence, the energetic, the life force. And there literally is a level of creation which is dominated by that quality. So the earthiness of the body is not there, but there is a more subtler level. And a universe of existence there. And everything has shown me over the years, when we pass from here very shortly, we go to that place or a higher level of life. This mind is really another vehicle that has a time frame, maybe a much longer time frame, but that ultimately, just like the physical body, can pass. So progressively through these different elements that they're talked about as elements, the earth, the water, not physical water, but a level of life is dominated by an element, fire, the mind, air, the qualities of deep feeling, intellect, ego. The being above that continues. And so that insight that I was given, as far as I could tell at that time, for no reason, was called pragya, truth, seeing truth, knowing truth, in more detailed Ritumbara pragya. That seeing and knowing obviously took years, decades to mature. And over the years, as that process begin to deepen. From time to time, the founder of Art of Living would share some stories. And I tell one of those stories in a sneak peek earlier chapters of this book. And it was an outline of another journey, secret journey. But this was of another individual that had an impact on my culture, and that was Jesus. So in every story in the world, your life is like a book. And if you only read a chapter in that book, you don't see the full dimension. And so many years back, around Christmas time, there was actually a post about this. And the first thing that he said in that video was, "This is a little controversial." And so this next book could be in that category. And in that video, he basically gave an outline of a child that was born in this part of the world, who was a student, advanced student, and how a yogi in India who had great intuitive capabilities. We talked about some of those intuitive capabilities. I've seen these capabilities demonstrate over and over and over, and honestly, sometimes in my own experience. So he told this story, and how this child in Israel, what is now Israel, was invited to, as a young child, go to India, be trained, spent some years there, and then went back to his home in that part of the world. The story that has come down to us traditionally about Jesus is part of the story. So there is a journey behind that story, which, in all honesty, with no intent from my side, begin to be shown to me. So in a sense, the founder gave that outline, and as far as I can tell, gave me the capacity to look deeper into that, and over the years drop little breadcrumbs. But there was a certain time in my life, right after the passing of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, where without any intent, no choice at all, I started to see scenes of this life, of that life. And after a few days of this happening every morning, so there's a state of consciousness called Turiya, which is a transitional between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And in that space, it is possible to have foreknowledge. And that foreknowledge, by the way, was happening to me when I was a child, on my own case. And also, pragya, wisdom in the present, was also happening back then. If you have a chance to look at some of the early chapters in the book as a child, I imagine myself going to the beach, and I'm able to travel out there with my senses. And I was extremely surprised that some of the things that I saw at the earlier age, at that very early age, were really there. And then there's another type of knowledge. Foreknowledge, knowledge in the present. You just know. And then it is possible to have foresight of the future. It is possible. And I've seen from time to time in my own experience, and many times around this great spiritual teacher, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, definite capabilities like that. So if we are going to help create a common understanding that the wisdom of the world and all the traditions is really connected. And these traditions are talking about essentially the same thing, regardless of how those individuals that come later interpret it and move it in different directions. It would be nice to know the backstory, wouldn't it? I mean, I know in my own life, it's been quite useful and very interesting. It's really been a detective story, an adventure story, these last 2 books for me, because this is what I lived through, what I passed through. Now, these types of insights actually have happened before in all cultures, more so in the East, but also in the West. And I'm not pretending to be an expert in world history or religion, but everybody in India from earliest childhood are hearing some of these stories from the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, and there are stories in those cultures about individuals who had, I'm sure, much, much better foresight, hindsight, prajna than me. You know, in the ancient past, and there is an ancient past that we don't, in the world as a whole, don't know about. And in the past, in the cosmic, there really is a history of that has been talked about. Some of the books are called the Puranas, another one called Yoga Vashista. Vyasa, one of the Maharishis, is a compiler of the Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. The story goes that he was given a boon and then was able to see these scenes, and the story about how it was all written down. Then there's another sage, his name is Valmiki. I suspect in the earlier times it was much easier to have a relationship with the cosmic realm. This is even more amazing about Valmiki. He was blessed with an insight and the ability to tell the entire story of the life of Rama in obviously a beautiful, poetic manner. The story goes, was given a boon that he would know the entire life of Rama, and everything that he wrote in this poem would be accurate, and that this point would endure forever. And that was before the story of Rama. I don't know. So there is a story behind the story in all of us. You know, and when I took the book that I'd written up to that point, before I reconnected with Sri Sri, because there was a whole book that happened afterward, came to the conclusion that whatever I had experienced long back in 1976, which was Sri Sri showing himself to me, whatever that was connected to all the traditions. So at least that intuition was right. Then I saw this outline of the life of Jesus that he gave. What was interesting is that, honestly, guys, I downloaded that to my computer and it disappeared. I wrote the summary, and I don't know of anybody that has that. But I kept that as an outline. And so this next book, I've been thinking for some time about how I would title it. You can see this as just one more opinion. This is what I passed through. But I do promise you, in the same way that I promised everyone at the beginning of the first book, and then about my adventure, that this is honestly what I experienced. Right after Maharishi's passing, That's when these scenes begin to roll through my mind. And so for a period of a few weeks, I went through that. Wrote those down, went through an editing process, and said, what in the world can I do with this? I wondered about it. And in a certain sense, if I hadn't been told some time ago, when I was invited by the founder of the Art of Living to go to these palm leaf readers, if the reader had not said, Yogadhi, you're going to do 3 books, I would stop here. I would totally stop here. But we're in a time in the world where we need to understand that we are all connected. There is a phenomenon, there's a wave of consciousness coming up in the world. If so many great teachers, and in my mind, I told the story about the superheroes in the last thing. There are many like that have these great qualities, not only in Art of Living, but all around the world. That this is a maturing of consciousness, and that the attainment of these states is not an individual achievement. There is a history of such things happening in the West, a little bit. And you may have heard, and I talked earlier in some of the episodes, about one seer in the West. His name was Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, if you've ever had a chance to read some of the stories in his life, he was able to touch this direct knowingness, and he spent much of his life just as any other individual, but he was able to close his eyes and to go into a state where he was able to have what I would call prajna, direct knowingness. How do you know? I have no idea. You just know. You know. And there is that state of consciousness where we can know directly. And he has passed, but there's an institute not too far from where I live in Boone, in Virginia Beach, and I have been there. So what Edgar Cayce was able to do, individuals need some health advice, and he would lay down and go into a superconscious state, and he would say, okay, I've located the body, and then he would go about and give a full diagnosis and prescription for treatment, holistic healthcare. Not ever meeting the person, never seeing them, no pictures, just the name and maybe the location. And his analysis was correct, and his treatments were effective. And I used many of those treatments, by the way, in my practice, my holistic practice. He was also able to access what we call foreknowledge in that same place. So some of these individuals would want to know certain problems I'm going on in my life. What's the story behind that story? Why these things are happening? And so he would also lay that out. Called past life readings. In many, many cases, if you have a chance to read that, and there's a huge library of these, thousands of those readings that are done, many individuals found that they made sense. Well, the treatments worked and helped in many, many cases, but they were natural therapies, very similar to what I was attempting to do in my holistic healthcare practice. Many of these I used. But he also touched into the foreknowledge. And there were certain readings that predicted certain events that would happen in the future. And you might suspect that he was very interested in the potential life of Jesus in the past and potentially in the future. So over the years, he gained more fame, but it was very hard on his body. And he was unable to do that in a conscious. I do believe we are in a more advanced state in the world now. And then we're gradually seeing through some of the programs the emergence of those possibilities. Obviously not in such a flashy way with him. This is what's happening. And nobody is more surprised than me. You know, there are so many great beings in the world now. And many of them, some of them I know, many of them are friends of mine in this wonderful organization, but also in many other traditions. There are many mature individuals on this planet. And this higher state of insight is also the natural state, next natural state of human evolution. And actually, Sri Sri told us some of the story of meeting some of these in his youth. Really interesting, really, really interesting. Individuals that are older and individuals that had intuition and how it got them into different difficulties and so on and so forth. So they're not without their plays. So we will see how it all evolves. I think it's time to begin to share that story. And perhaps the earlier things that I've written will help people have confidence in this. And then there's evidence. There is an alternative story already in the culture of India about the life of Jesus, or actually he was known as Isa or Isas in that culture. Both a childhood story, a middle life story, and then a return, where after he got in trouble and survived, whatever you want to call it, resurrected, survived, he returned, was in Kashmir. Certainly St. Thomas was in South India industry. So this book, take it however you will. And I guess I could say, believe it or not, I'm just going to share this in the next book, honestly. And so that title will be Jesus, the story behind that greatest story. And in the West, we talk about this as the greatest story ever told. We will see. Okay. Very quietly, I'll be sharing it here, where nobody's seeing it, because it's important to document it. Much of it has been written, not all of it, not all of the whole life of this being. Up in Canada, there was a retreat center, an ashram in Canada, still is, outside of Montreal. And one Christmas, Sri Sri started to share a little bit about Jesus. During that time, I was beginning to become more aware of this. The name on the main lecture hall up there in Canada, if you go there, look up above the door, you may not have noticed it, is Isa. Well, one Christmas there, he was talking about, reminiscing, I guess, telling a little bit about this story. And it piqued my interest. And he said something unbelievable. He was talking about the old timers were there in the room. Many of us were sitting there, and he looked around a little mischievously as he was talking about this. He was talking about Jesus, and he said, could also be one of our teachers. may even be up here in Canada. And the hair on the back of my head just stood up. You know, the one individual life doesn't matter. But the life that we live, that is within us, that is connected to everything, that's what's important. And as I've come to understand a little bit more about that, what happened, and we'll get into that in the next book. We'll open that door. We'll crack that door open and try to examine it and see what apparently happened. In a very real sense, that story is really the story of well over 100,000 individuals, hundreds of thousands of individuals, really. And that is also the story of what's happening with this unbelievable organization, the Art of Living. You see, there are hundreds of thousands of individuals around this world doing good works in this organization. And in a real sense, they're out in maybe a very difficult environment, undertaking very difficult challenges to overcome those challenges and help raise the consciousness of the whole society. Isn't that really the story of this being that came up in this culture, was fortunate enough to receive teachings? That's what people don't know. The most beautiful rose does not just appear out of nowhere. The soil must be fertile. The right nutrients must be planted at the right time. In the middle of winter, they all die. But ultimately, what comes up is what's coming up within all of us. So my sense is that we're repeating history here. Not just with one individual whose story was passed down, somewhat distorted, and is like a single chapter in a whole life. What happened before, what happened after. But I'll enjoy sharing that as best I can. And I'm sharing this part now. Everybody that's listening here, hopefully they have taken the benefit of hearing my earlier story, so you'll feel a little bit more confident. So thank you for coming and listening today. This is a very wonderful, fulfilling day for me. I've completed 2 major projects, really 3 now. One of my great dreams was to be part of and to recreate, in a sense, what was lost, be part of this great community here. Number 2, help share the unbelievable adventures that I had in the earlier part of my life, which is really a topic on its own. And then this second book, the rise of the first world teacher. And with that, the rise of millions of people dedicated to our common one world family and our common tradition of wisdom, which is much bigger than any culture, any faith, any tradition, and can act as a connecting point. We should hold our common humanity above all. When we get in trouble is when we hold our tribe, our particular cultural point of view, or our faith above everything else. When we start saying that this point of view is the only possible point of view, then we start getting in trouble. Then we start justifying all kinds of actions to preserve that faith or that tradition or that culture above our humanness, above our connection to this one life that we are living. We're really like fish in the sea looking for the ocean. And what we seek and we want most desperately in our life is all around us and inside of us. And I do believe that this life is a school. And we are all moving towards graduating. We can talk about that graduation as living the cosmic awareness, the connectedness in deeper experiences. And when that experience becomes stronger, and it does become stronger, then your separateness, every unique quality that you have as a human being, gets accelerated, improved, and the negatives begin to fade. It doesn't mean that there is never any worry or doubt or anger or frustration. Don't look for forever in any emotion, because all of these emotions are part of life. And the world is constantly challenging us, putting circumstances in front of us for our growth. And so we need to be plotted and pushed. I certainly know that I've been plotted and pushed in so many ways. And I feel unbelievably grateful to have been a part of this story. And I'm really a part of our story, our common story of humanity. So thank you for listening. And I encourage you to go back and perhaps listen. You know, there are many clues here. And there will be many clues, actually, that I haven't talked about. Because that's how it's been for me, really. It's a mystery story. I've been trying to figure out, what are we? How do we come here? Where do we go? What are some of the basic principles of life? And to validate that and to help people understand that there's a succession to that growth and evolution. There are 3 really fortunate things that happened to me in my life. Number 1, I was fortunate enough to be driven from an early age to look for deeper answers in my life, with the passing of my father and the disasters and the alcoholism and the drugs and all of the difficult things that happened in my earlier years. I was fortunate because I was forced to look at a very early age. And also because of some of these foresights that I had of these earlier times, I'm really glad about that. The second fortunate thing that happened to me is I was very, very lucky in that I was able to, one of the most dangerous times of my life that I talk about in the first book, I could have ended up being shot. So I was fortunate enough to come in contact with knowledge and to realize that that was useful and to take advantage of that. And then the third fortune that I have is really right behind me. The founder of this organization. In my opinion, there's nothing like this has ever happened, at least in our history. A true world teacher, a true global force of good, a true individual and organization, which is taking responsibility in every way possible for the entire world, and is really mobilizing forces here in this world. I'm just one little piece of that for good. So thank you for listening today. Join us again for the introduction to book 3. Wow. Wow. What can I say? Wow. Namaste. Thanks for joining us in our YouTube channel, books, podcast episodes on living the enlightened life with your host, Dr. James Weldon.